Hi, Anthony. Thank you for being with us today. Always a pleasure talking to you and having you on this occasion with the third edition of the Remote One and Case of Knowledge Bar launching now, where we talk about rethinking learning. But before we get into those questions and your insights, would you mind giving a brief introduction of yourself?
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, Axel. Yeah, my name's Anthony Devine. I'm Director of Accreditation at Northumbria University. That's in Newcastle upon Tyne. So that role means that I look after all of the standards in all of our accreditors, and that particularly my passion is around AOL, but I do have to look after all of the other standards as well. So yeah, I've been involved particularly with ACSB for quite a number of years. I deliver AOL seminars for participants around the world. I do consulting, and I also have been involved in the development of the new standards. So yeah, very passionate about AOL, but yeah, but my job day to day is Director of Accreditation. I'm also an accounting academic, so I don't know if that's a lot of accounting academics like accreditation. So.
Well, yeah, I think that there may not be too many, but it is exactly your passion and expertise
Yeah.
in AOL that made us think of you for this very interview and this very edition of the Knowledge Bar, and that's why we're very excited to have you. But before we get to some specific AOL questions, let's talk a bit in general about the current situation. And obviously, while we're all sick and tired of talking about the pandemic, it sort of has to evolve a little bit about that. As you know, and I'm sure it's been the case for you as well at Northumbria, is that at the beginning of the pandemic, obviously everyone seemed to be rushing their lectures online, especially those obviously that were not online before. But obviously with all that having happened now and the pandemic continuing, have you since seen schools or even at your own institution where the teaching didactics have changed, where they have been adapted to this new reality, and how?
Yeah, I think, as you say, I think at the beginning of the pandemic, for a lot of schools that engage with traditional forms of learning, we had to find very quick solutions around moving material that we would, ordinarily would be in person to translate into online. And I think a lot of people think that's as easy as just doing exactly what you did, but just online. And it's actually not. It's very different because we know that engagement is different online as it is in person. So I think there's been a lot of change in sort of how we actually deliver to sessions to students. The pedagogy that underpins the way we deliver things has changed significantly. And that's not just at my own school, but as you said, I'm seeing that across other schools as well. Particularly, I guess, around and how that's evolved, over time, is that we're now beginning to see, a lot more appetite, I think, from students as well to have certain elements of their learning online and still valuing face-to-face delivery clearly. And some of us, I mean, I know in my own school, we're still not, we're not back to face-to-face delivery yet. It's still all online because of the situation in the UK still. But students are clearly telling us that, that there is value in getting some of their delivery online because there is benefits in terms of accessibility. There's benefits in terms of, when they can actually access that material. But I think it now is about the kind of material that they're accessing and where they see the most value. So, in a didactic delivery, perhaps they aren't seeing, they see the value in being able to get that in a asynchronous format. But whereas the sort of more interactive, co-creational delivery, which is, your traditional sort of seminar and workshop type style delivery, then they obviously see the value in that because they get the ability to interact with colleagues, co-create ideas, etc. So I definitely see that there's a change. I guess how institutions respond to that change is what will be interesting over the coming year or so.
Well, in contrast, obviously, that there are some formats that really benefit from the face-to-face experience. Things like consulting field studies, lab days,
Yeah.
study trips, etc. And all of that obviously had to be put on hold.
Yes.
Do you think those experiences are lost forever, to be dramatic, for those students that may have started their studies within the last year or so?
I mean, I certainly hope not. You know, I certainly hope that in the near future that those experiences can perhaps be embedded into students' programs. I would hope that those things are not lost forever. And I definitely see that those are things that have to be a key feature of programs. And, you know, I don't think this is the end of those things. I think those still things are very key for students' development. I think what a lot of schools have tried to do is you're never going to be able to replicate a study trip experience, you know, online. That's never going to happen. But I think what a lot of schools have done is tried their best to create environments where collaboration like that can still happen. Obviously in an online format, you know, so they've looked at different pedagogy that underpins the delivery to try and create that collaborative approach. I know myself with my own students, you know, I've tried all different ways of collaboration. And one of the things that I found, you know, is most key for most students is WhatsApp. You know, students collaborate over WhatsApp probably more than, or Instagram, more than they do email or, you know, even Microsoft Teams. You know, students don't kind of, students today are accessing information in a much more different way than perhaps we would have done, you know, ourselves. So students interact with information in different ways and collaborate in different ways. And I think it's about institutions really kind of tuning into that. And you know, it's not, students don't want to be spoken to via email. They want to have a personal touch where they can collaborate and stuff. And that's, you know, face group books or, you know, or anything like that. But I would hope that those things are not lost, definitely. But I know that, like in my own school, we've definitely tried very hard to replicate that as much as possible. But you know, it is difficult.
Well, obviously, what we hope for many on those face-to-face experience to come back eventually. Now, what we've also seen, obviously, is that the pandemic has accelerated digitalization like nothing else, right? I mean, I know from many schools that I've spoken with, and I'm sure you've had those experiences as well, that many have been talking about it for years and years and haven't really delivered on those discussions. And obviously last year, suddenly everyone was forced to do it. And I saw so many LinkedIn posts of proud deans posting how they suddenly digitized all their teaching. But obviously, while we do hope for face-to-face or in-person classes to come back eventually, what sort of elements of that digitalization do you think are here to stay? Which formats do you think will stay, especially for like the traditional on-campus institutions?
I think it's I think what's definitely for all of us, whether it's students or not, we found another way to engage with each other in a way that, as you say, has been accelerated very quickly. I mentioned MS Teams before, and I don't think I'd even heard of Teams a year ago, and now I sort of spend every waking moment on it. You know, so I think how we interact with each other is going to be different. You know, after the pandemic has ended, I think that the I think if I was to think about how we might engage with students in a different way, I think the as I've said, the more sort of didactic things could probably continue to be online, and we still value the things that are those on campus experiences like the traditional seminars. I think one thing I think will probably exist differently post pandemic is to support students in a different way. So, you know, when a student really needed help, traditionally what we'd have done is, well, you know, we probably have said, well, drop us an email and come to our office to see us, you know, and we would have sat and maybe talked a little bit. And actually, I think one of the things we have now got is very much like a digital culture of engagement. So I've got, you know, an automatic calendar set up, and students can select half an hour in my calendar, and we can meet via a link that we send automatically. And so students actually don't have to come into the university to necessarily get that support that they need, whether that's about academic support, pastoral support, but they don't have to actually physically leave, say, where they live to actually get that support very quickly. And traditionally, they would have had to sort of come and find me. They would have had to, do all those things. But because we've been able to accelerate that, both for the student and the sort of the academics, I think that's going to be something that students will really value. And I have a personal tutor for 30, 40 students, and all of those students have engaged with that much more than I think they would have in a traditional setting. So I think there's going to be benefits, definitely in terms of the way we support students. And I think even the most traditional of on-campus universities are going to change, to look at kind of how we blend delivery in a different way. I mean, I can't speak for my institution because I've got no idea of what the plans are post-pandemic. But I think as a sector, you can see that that's already evolving in that way.
Well, it's interesting to hear that. Obviously, it's not only the teaching that changes, but from the examples you've given, also the service levels provided to students, and obviously making new ways of interaction. There's been another trend that has been accelerated by the pandemic, micro-credentials, which obviously is also fueled by the fact that we're all working from home now and we have decreased mobility. Do you think that micro-credentials could potentially be a threat, or rather an opportunity for classic traditional higher education institutions?
I think the answer to that is both. I think they are potentially a threat if traditional education settings don't attune to the fact that they are there. So I think, if institutions sort of think that they're maybe just going to exist in the short term, then that would be a mistake, because it's clear that that kind of education is appealing to a lot of students. We see this sort of coming out of Silicon Valley almost every other day. You see a news story about how Google are launching platforms, or collaborating around these kind of short-term certificates that students are able to get and put on their CVs that make them really employable. Because ultimately, that this is about employability. Students do this so that they'll get a good job. So I think if traditional institutions sort of don't recognize that, then that would be a mistake. I think there is still a place for traditional education, because I think students come to universities to get a degree. That's definitely one of the things they do. But I think there's also an experiential side of university that I think micro-credentialing doesn't give you as much. So you may, you maybe do these small certificates, and you may do them at home, or you might do them online with people. But there is still a social element and a sort of collaborative element to university life that I think is still setting students up for a very sort of positive working experience. So I think there is a place for both in the market. I think it's just about how traditional universities respond to those things, and how we can work together to demonstrate what we offer is unique and meaningful for students. So it's I think the period upon which that that comes out, it's going to be, this debate is always going to occur, and we're going to see that over the next 5 to 10 years. You hear studies all the time about the MBA is dead. I've heard that like in the FT, sort of like every weekend for the last but you hear these stories sort of all the time. But I think there is still a lot of value in some of these the things that are offered. So I think it's both an opportunity and a potential threat. But it's how each of those handle them that'll be interesting, I think, over the coming years.
So there is a chance for coexistence.
I think well, I've got to live in hope that there's a chance for coexistence. Yes, because I think it's also interesting that we talk about how all of our programs, for example, where I work at Northumbria, are underpinned by a very significant research culture. And that's a really important part of our programs, how programs are built upon academic research. And that the micro credentials are not necessarily built upon those pillars. So I think there's also a place for how research and the research culture in the world we live in has to be important. I think you can't really go beyond the pandemic to see how important research is in the world we live. Without top quality research, we wouldn't be able to develop vaccines. We wouldn't be able to develop anthropological studies to understand how people are going to respond to vaccine and all of the other things that are associated with research. So there's also that as well, that how programs are actually constructed and how, how those are delivered to students. So yeah, I think research is key, obviously, as well.
Now, that would have made for a perfect final statement of the interview. However, we haven't touched upon one topic that obviously we cannot skip, with you obviously having a big expertise and being well known in the realms of AOL. So let's move on to that topic for a bit as well. Now, obviously with schools having had to change the way they teach, moving everything online, etc., have you encountered schools that had to adapt their AOL processes during the pandemic while they changed everything, and what exactly were the effects, if so?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I've spoken to a lot of schools about this, and I've spoken at a few conferences about it, and we've discussed this over the year. It's been a big part of the discussion in the community, and some schools have completely, depending upon the mechanism by which the data are collected, they've had to completely pause their AOL processes. If you are testing your students with on-site testing, and you can no longer come to site, you can't continue with that, So there is certain parts of AOL processes that have had to be paused. I guess it's interesting, for those who are interested in this, there is the ACSB have issued some guidance on this in their FAQs around COVID-19 and around how you might handle this. So for those, please visit the website and have a look at those. But schools have had to adapt their processes, and I think it's definitely recognised by the ACSB that that is the case. And the guidance that you'll see there is peer review teams for schools that are coming up to accreditation shortly will of course be cognizant of the fact that some schools will have had to pause some AOL processes, and that's inevitable. I think we've been quite lucky actually at Northumbria, because all of our submissions are all online, and were online prior to the pandemic. We had AOL assessment, and all of our grading and assessment is electronic via Blackboard. So we didn't actually feel the impact of that as much as a lot of schools have. But some schools have responded to that by sort of pausing. Others have come up with sort of innovative ways to measure their AOL. But I think the key message there is that if it isn't all perfect, I mean it's fine if it's all perfect, not all perfect anyway. But I think definitely during this period, there's an understanding from peer review teams that might be the case.
Mm. On that same note, we've seen some other changes to AOL that obviously weren't led by the pandemic, but by the new 2020 standards, and that is now the increased focus on indirect measures. I'm sure you get that question a lot as well. I do also get it sometimes when I speak to schools, and that is like, what are best practices for indirect measures? How to best incorporate that in your AOL process? Do you mind sharing something?
Yeah, I mean, I think with indirect measures, it's sort of maybe useful to think about the history of indirect measures, and I'll not go into too much detail. But of course, indirect measures have been around for a long, long time. And in the 2013 standards, there was sort of less of an emphasis on indirect measures, in the sense that it was expected that they may be part of the information that you give and the way that you drive continuous improvement in the system. But there was never a requirement for indirect measures. And the key change in the 2020 standards is this inclusion that indirect measures are now, you are expected to demonstrate indirect measures as part of the portfolio of evidence for the peer review team. And it may be as useful, I guess, Axel, to unpick what that really means, because what that really means in practice is that you don't you don't have to have an indirect measure for every single learning objective. That's very important, because a lot of people are reading this and saying, oh, you know, we have to produce an indirect measure for every program, for every objective, and that isn't the case. What is the case is that when the peer review team turn up to the school, you will be expected to demonstrate that you have considered some indirect measures in how you've driven continuous improvement in the system. And that will be obviously with your direct measures. So, you know, you might take an example, might be that on your accounting program, you have got your direct measure data and you've driven continuous improvement. But in order to do that, you've also looked at the student satisfaction components of that program. You've sought stakeholder opinion on the design of the program. You've discussed with students whether they're happy with the program, or you've discussed with employers about the program. So you can actually show how the indirect measures that you've captured can help you really paint a picture of what the continuous improvement should be. So in terms of the embedding indirect measures into the portfolio of evidence, that's also there. The other thing around indirect measures that is perhaps a change is that you can now, it's permissible under certain circumstances to have indirect measures as the sole drivers for continuous improvement on a program, and therefore to close the loop. And those drivers, or those conditions are when you have what's called a small, niche, specialized or interdisciplinary program. And you know, we talk a lot about this in the ACSB training sessions that we do, but you know, small, niche, specialized, interdisciplinary, small is about the number of students that you have on the program. So if you've got a specialized master's program with 5 students on it every year, you're not really going to be able to build up a very good sample of data to drive meaningful improvements and close the loop in a 5-year cycle. So actually you could use indirect measures in that example to help drive closing the loop, because you can use those as the sole drivers. So but the key there is that those words small, niche, interdisciplinary, specialized, because you know, I don't think a peer review team, if you've got 1,000 students on a program and you say we've only used indirect measures, I somehow don't think that'll fly, because clearly you could have used direct measures. So I think I think the reason for this inclusion of indirect measures in this way is that we do see a trend now of things like interdisciplinary programs where business schools want to test how they might work in collaboration with, say, a faculty of health on, say, an MBA in healthcare, or you know, something like that, and they want to test how this is going to work. And so, but they don't want to be burdened by ACSB and AOL. They want to see how it's going to work. So this gives a lot more flexibility in the system, and that obviously aligns with the way the standards are moving into a more principles-based approach. So that just gives you, I guess, a flavour of how indirect measures are being considered in the new standards.
Well, those are some really great insights. Much appreciated, and I think for everyone watching this, I think this was a very good advertisement for joining one of your AOL seminars to learn more.
Sorry, that wasn't my intention.
No, I'm making it as a point because I think those were some great insights that just prove how valuable those seminars are. But let's finish off actually with one more piece of advice, if I may ask that of you. And that's more generally for any school starting the AACSB journey, because I remember as well when I had to do an initial AACSB accreditation, the thing that got me lost the most was AOL, at first at least. Now obviously the AOL seminars, they help, and with time you really learn your way around it. But just imagine for any school starting the process and they feel lost, what advice would you give them how to get started and do it?
Yeah, I think 2 things. One thing is the pursuit of excellence is the pursuit of perfection is the enemy of the system. So if you are trying to produce a perfect system, you will never start. So that's one thing. Accept that there will be flaws in the system initially and get off the ground. If you try and make it perfect before you start, you'll never start. Because my system's 15 years in and it's still not perfect. The second thing is simplicity is key. The simpler, the better. And the real way I would demonstrate or think about simplicity is keeping goals and objectives to a minimum. So thinking about how you can capitalize upon, say, your skills-based goals and objectives and use those to share across your programs, and perhaps have knowledge-based goals and objectives that are specific to programs. Because then what you're really doing is creating a very concise set of goals and objectives that you have to then use in terms of measures. If you start creating unique sets of goals and objectives for all the different programs in your portfolio, it can be very burdensome on the program and the requirements that you have to do. Complemented with that, you know, where you can gain efficiencies in the measures. So if you can get one piece of work that a student does an artifact and you can collect multiple objectives worth of data from that artifact, take that opportunity. Don't think that you have to create you know, for every single objective, a different measure or, you know, a different rubric. So I think two things, you know, don't try and seek perfection, because you'll never get there until you sort of seek going iterations of the system, and try and keep it as simple as possible in terms of the base design of your goals and objectives, because that will get you a lot of efficiencies in the system, but it'll also help you with faculty buy-in, because faculty, you know, don't see it as a burdensome activity if you can limit that down as much as possible.
Well,
Those
thanks
are my two key takeaways.
Those are some great insights. Thanks a lot, Anthony. And I'm sure we could keep going on. I could keep going on listening to your advice for quite some time, but obviously we got to look at the time. So I'll take those two key points in the end as a closing statement. So thanks very much for taking the time today. And yeah, speak again soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Axel.